Just a quick, this meeting is being recorded. Just a quick note that if you do want to put your cameras on, I'm more than happy to see your beautiful or handsome faces, but I would ask that you stay on mute. You're more than welcome to put a question into the chat while I'm talking. I will try and keep an eye on it for you. Hello to people joining us. As I said, I'm more than happy for you guys to have your cameras on if you would like to show your face, but I will ask that you stay on mute for the session. Any questions, I'm more than happy for you guys to put in the chat. I will try and keep an eye on it throughout. I think we're going to have a pretty chill and informal session, so I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Just wait a minute more. Hello to anyone joining us. Hello to everyone joining us. I'll just repeat again that I'm more than happy for you to have your cameras on. If you would like to share your face, it would be nice to see some faces, and that I will keep an eye on the chat if anybody has questions that they would like to ask. Nice to see you, Nick. Yeah, see, that's much nicer. I feel like I'm talking to actual people. As I said, I will ask that you stay on mute, but if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and I will answer them for you. It seems like we're all pretty much here, so I'm going to get cracking. But if anybody does join us, I'm sure they can bring themselves up to speed. I'll give myself a little bit of an introduction. Hi, I'm Megan. I did have a talk go out this morning, I believe, about young people and young entrepreneurs and habits of young entrepreneurs. Bit of background about me. I hang out a lot in startup spaces. I definitely got my beginning in startups and advising small businesses. Actually worked in online real estate for a really long time, and the organizer John Henry and I actually involved in a project together. So that's how I got the elusive invite. I'm going to talk about a couple of key points that I find that people have problems with when they're starting to develop a business idea or when they're starting to develop their business in general. Thank you to everyone joining us. Feel free to pop a question in the chat and feel free to have your cameras on. Yeah, so let's crack into a couple of the key points. I want to run through what I would consider the key stage that I'm involved with within businesses, which is I like to take people who just have an idea. So people who just have an idea in their head of something that they want to make change in, or a business idea, and they have no idea where to start. That's usually where I have my first interaction with businesses who are building themselves. What the most common question that I get at that stage is like, is this a good idea? Which I think is a common like concern that we all have, like, oh, I think this is a good idea, but how do I know? And there are a couple of key criteria that I think you could double check. I think the most important and easiest one to explain is definitely timing in the market. I'm sure most of you are aware, if you are first to market, it's going to be maybe a little bit easier for you than if you're trying to compete with an existing market. That being said, consumers are sometimes not ready for the change or for the product that you're about to bring. I've had plenty of interactions with people who tried to set up companies like YouTube, for example, before YouTube got its start. And because of the way the internet ran at that time, the market just wasn't ready for that kind of overconsumption, that kind of difficulty to find things in searches. It just wasn't the right timing. So I think timing is a super important one. And if you've got anything that's going to interact economically, especially, it's good to consider if you're in a recession, for example. Uber, Netflix, Netflix and all of these kind of companies got their start because there was some kind of economic discourse and people were trying to make a bit more money. Airbnb is another good example. Before the economic crisis, people were like, oh, you would never rent out a room to a stranger. You'd never rent out a room in your house to a stranger. And then the need was there for people to get more money and they weren't using that space anyway. So I think I really want to emphasize that you should consider timing, and that will probably give you a good indication as to whether it's a good idea. Of course, timing isn't the only thing that you need to consider. You should consider what your team will look like, what your business model will look like. And I think the one that people struggle with the most is where funding will come from. I work a lot with angel investors. So I find that's what most people come to me about. They say, hey, I would like an angel investor who's going to be somewhat involved in the process. Will you please go away and find one for me? And they are one route that you can go down. I think you're lucky in today's day and age that if you're looking at setting up a business, there are lots and lots of funding options available. The government, banks, co-working spaces, incubators and all of these kind of things. People are just throwing money at small businesses and startups at the moment. And I think, therefore, that you shouldn't have a concern about funding. What you should have a concern about is building a good enough business plan and a good enough value stack that people will want to actually invest in what you're doing. And I think this comes back to, you have to really believe in what you're doing and really believe in the services that you're selling, etc. You'll hear it often from entrepreneurial people that you need to be super passionate about what you're doing. And I think this rings true. Like, often the most successful companies are run by people who genuinely think that their idea is making a difference, or they genuinely think that they're out there doing a bit of change alongside just running a business. I think it's super important to have some kind of value behind a company, some kind of charity that you donate to, or any of those kind of things that will make it, more than just a business. I think people get in the habit of being very analytical. Of course, these are all just from my own experiences. I have advised probably over 100 startups at this point. So I think I've got a pretty good pool to pick from. Did anybody have any questions? I think that's pretty much summed up what I wanted to touch on, and the most common questions that I get. In terms of how that relates to sustainability, I think it's fairly obvious, but feel free to pick my brain on it. Give you a second to type it in the chat if you do have anything. If not, I will carry on rambling at you.
Megan, hi.
Hiya.
Hi. Do you see any opportunities in any particular areas of sustainability that you think are being sort of underworked, and where there's niches or where there's easy wins, shall we say, for tech products that can really make a difference?
Yeah, good question. So I think there are a couple of different places. Chris Pratchett has actually just given a fairly good talk on alternatives to driving. I think during the COVID era, we've all sort of shied away from things like buses or trains, etc. And so there are more wheels on the road than ever. It's possible that we're yet to see, I think, something that's had a mass acceptance, like Boris bikes or, scooters. It seems like they still have a lot of issues and the users are still not super happy. I think that's a market where if we got it right, it would be a no-brainer to a lot of people, and that might come down to either like a psychological nudge that we have to give people, where we give them more of an incentive to use them, but also I think the software side of that kind of technology is underdeveloped at the moment. Finding the nearest set of wheels to you that isn't a bus or a train or a car rental, etc., I think is an area that we could focus a little bit more in. Is there anywhere else? I think green financing could use some more people active in it. And I think to a certain extent it would be nice to see a couple of accelerators who are just sustainability based. I think there's a gap in the market for something like that. because a lot of these accelerator programs, or a lot of the people trying to help small businesses and startups, aren't focusing just on sustainability. They focus too broadly on the picture, and actually running a sustainable business takes a consideration of that the whole way through. Hopefully that makes sense.
It did, thank you. Yeah.
No worries. Does anybody have anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, I'm going to ask, this might be rather pointy. I don't know whether it's a pointy question or not. So you talk about finance there and looking for investors, and one perception might be that financiers want their money back quickly. They want to make more revenue, more gain. Are they looking in the sustainability space? There's obviously, I assume they're looking at, well, that's going to help their business long term by investing in businesses that are there for the longer good. Are they still purely going after the money in their finance space, or are they kind of going, okay, well, maybe my returns might be slightly lower or slightly different, but actually, because I know I'm also supporting a greater good, I'm okay with that?
Yeah, really good question, actually. I think it's always a no-brainer to investors if they can feel assured that they're going to get a return on their investment quicker. It's always much easier to get an investor if you've got a solid business plan that says, like, hey, you'll see your money back in 18 months from now. And there's no reason why lots of sustainable companies wouldn't be able to do that. Often it's a collaboration thing where if they found the right other company to work with, they could be making the money back fairly easily, but they have to have established that networking to begin with. I have found an increasing amount of investors actually that care more about having what we call a socially responsible portfolio. And so it's basically, they'll either only be interested in taking things that will have an actual change in the world, or they're trying to balance out something else that's going on. For example, lots of oil contributors have started to say, oh, my board is like kind of getting on my back about sustainability. If I put my money in sustainability, then at least that I can show that I am conscious of that, and that I am trying to make the changes, etc. It is a bit of a difficult one, but I think it is a growing market of investors who are keen to get something in their portfolio that is just going to either pay off in the very long run or just make them feel a little bit better. It's kind of like any, pro bono or philanthropist work. I think it does make people feel good. What I would say about that is that even though there are less investors compared to the ones that are obviously focused on money, there are more government schemes, I would say, who care less about the money that you're going to give them back. And so government schemes, bank loans, co-working spaces, accelerator programs, those might be a better route to go if that's something, if you're worried about the money side of your business. But usually what I find is that when we go into business that says like, oh, I'm not going to make money for 5 years, when we actually sit down with them and set a realistic timeline of things, we realize, oh, you could make it in 12 months if you did something different, or if you focused a little bit more on this, or if you diversified the product a little bit more, or you didn't think of this application. Often this is the case for, like, if you're setting up something from scratch, you're going to be building a CRM your own side. And there are plenty of companies who are looking for a sustainable CRM. So could you not take that element that you're going to build for your business and pay it out to other businesses to give them a bit of a head start? I think that's a great example. Yep. I think someone's put in the chat about a couple of good social funders to mention, Unlimited and Resonance. So yeah, I think they're good ones to bear in mind as well. Anything else? I fear that I've left a little bit too long for questions, and maybe I should have babbled on at you guys a little bit more.
Well,
and Andrew?
It was just, I know there's a concurrent session about BCorps happening as well. Mm-hmm. So don't really want to meander too far into that. But in the startup space and the organizations that you're engaging with, how many of those are either looking already at B Corps. Obviously, they can't register as a B Corp until they're at least a year into the process. Or how many are actively looking at that and or similar programs for really embedding social value and social impact and environmental sustainable practices right from the get-go, because that's the easiest time to really get things right.
Yeah, so I think that a common problem we have is that actually people are completely unaware of B Corps until they're like a little bit of the way into their journey, especially if it's like their first business or it's the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey, etc. Usually once it's brought to their attention, it's a pretty easy sell. Like there are lots of benefits to developing your business in that kind of way. So yeah, I would say it's a bit of a strange one. Like as soon as they become aware of it, it's pretty much, I would say about 80% of the time, it's something that they're at least interested in, if not fully pursuing. And then, you know, some people are just super keen to shy away from those kind of labels, especially I think younger generations. They don't want to be involved in any kind of like external businesses. They don't want to put any label on the business. They don't want to be a limited company or anything like that. They just want to like get on with what they're doing, which I think is where a lot of young people come into a lot of problems, is that they think they focus too much on doing good, that they don't focus on building a business. The question in the chat, do you have any experience in designing tech for good and keeping it so? Reference Social Dilemma, Netflix and the tech addiction. Yes. Yeah. So we have taken a little bit of a look into internet habits, etc. And obviously there's increasingly worrying research coming out about technology and the way that young people use it. I think if you would like to see an example of that, find any, you know, young teenager these days and ask them how many hours they spend on TikTok. Because the last person I asked said they spent on average 9 hours a day on that platform, just scrolling through their For You page. We have some good companies, well, there are some good companies within the Google campus specifically who are doing some great psychological research into what we could be doing different on social media platforms to protect the users a little bit more. I do think there has been a trend in the media to maybe villainize it a little bit more than it needs to be. There are plenty of other media sources that will do you just as much damage, but I do think there's a worrying trend of, how would you put it, coding in addictive behaviors is where problems arise. So social media adverts, etc. are obviously on the rise. I think especially during the pandemic, we've seen people switch over to things like influencer marketing, things like Facebook adverts. I know I've seen a massive peak. There are certain platforms that are now emerging that are calling themselves like advert-free social media, or, you know, something like that. But I think the problem that you have is if you build something on the internet that's advert-free, how do you make any money from it? You either have to put it behind a paywall, which means that you can't appeal to mass market often unless that paywall is very small, or your idea is very developed. Yeah, or you have to go through a subscription model or something like that. You have to make money some ways in order to keep up with the upkeep of any kind of social media platform or any kind of internet platform. Do you think any regions in the UK that are doing better, doing more in regards to supporting launching sustainability-led startups? Yeah, I would say definitely Cornwall. It's a no-brainer. Definitely one of the sustainability fronts in the UK. I think we're starting to see entrepreneurs move away from London a little bit. I have found an increasing number of co-working spaces and accelerators popping up. Brighton, where I'm based in Essex, those places that are commutable to London but outside of London seem to be a good place where people are trying to keep their costs low. They're a little bit more sustainable in general because they're not directly in the city, but you know, they've got those direct communication lines where that they can still sort of benefit from the best of both worlds. I've also seen some interesting stuff proposed for the little islands off of Scotland. They've all got different names, but like the Isle of Rum and like those Isle of Skye and stuff like that. It seems like companies on the mainland seem to be considering those kind of places either as like a base for their business, or either somewhere that they're going to move their business, or something that they're kind of going to benefit off of. And I think that's for lots of different reasons. You've seen talks about geothermal possibilities, and I think those would run a little bit better on those smaller islands. It's something to do with currents, but I'm not scientific background, so don't quote me on it. Yeah, so I think those are the main things to bear in mind. I have seen an increase in people in the north as well, like Edinburgh, those kind of big cities that are a little bit north in the UK. It seemed to be emerging a little bit more than London at the moment. I think London has seen a decrease in startup bases and entrepreneur journeys just because it's so expensive, and during the pandemic it's so not worth living in London. So yeah, I think we've seen people sort of shy away from that as a tech base. That being said, of course, there's like a silicone roundabout in London. The Old Street roundabout is actually where a lot of the bigger tech companies are based: Google, Amazon, places like that. And so if you want to collaborate with any of those bigger kind of companies, you do kind of have to bear in mind that that is where they're all based. Hopefully that that made a bit of sense. As I said, there are a couple of things to consider. Obviously, the UK is fairly large. Yeah, it's also worth noting that we've run into a couple of problems with businesses in the Republic of Ireland. It's worth bearing in mind that if you are setting up a business there, or if you're setting up a business here, you need to bear in mind that the laws are going to be completely different, and that we do run as separate countries and separate entities often. So there are different law barriers into getting your products into the Republic of Ireland. I know Brewdog, for example, said that they had a couple of issues when they were trying to expand that kind of way. Anything else? As I said, I fear I've misjudged how much time I had in my hands.
Megan, can I just ask, if you were giving advice to someone setting up any startup business, and they wanted to be more sustainable, they hadn't really thought about it, but they wanted to put some measures in place, what kind of key things would you say to look at?
Yeah, so there are kind of two routes. There are the one where you put it in your values. So maybe it's something that you say like, okay, one of my company values is that I want to be sustainable in everything that I do, and so I need to consider that at all points going forward. I think that's a fairly easy way out. And I think that's like, okay, you're just giving yourself a nudge along the journey to consider something that you think is important. A great one that we've seen emerging is the certifications and regulation boards that you can have associated with your business that will regulate you for you. They'll take out the sort of you having to regulate yourself and make sure you're sustainable. You're basically going to contract somebody else to come in and check that you meet the standards, and in exchange you'll get a certification. And a lot of these certifications are becoming more and more known and widely accepted. And so the benefit for you is you've got a marketing point of saying like, okay, I'm ISO 1007 accredited or something. And that means that I'm regulated by a third party, and they come into the business and they check that what we're doing. I think that one is like zero waste to landfill. So they check that none of the waste from our business is going into landfills, and as much as it can be recycled is being recycled. And so I think that that's something that people are starting to adopt more and more often. I think those third-party accreditations are sort of the way that you keep yourself accountable, and sort of the easy way for you to tell consumers that that's something that you care about. There are unfortunately quite a few problems with a couple of the existing regulatory boards, as in they might tell you that they're going to regulate it for you, but they have no scientists on their board. They have no consideration of like creation to cradle or anything like that. So I think it's quite easy to accidentally greenwash yourself. But as long as you do it right, I think that's the solution for lots and lots of companies, is just bringing on board some kind of third-party regulator that you've taken the time to double check that they do what they say they do. Okay, well, do you have any advice for someone who might want help in sustainability startups if they wanted it? How would one go about finding? Yeah, so I talked about this in my talk earlier. I think that collaboration is a big key in startups. I think the best thing you can do for yourself is network, and find somebody who's trying to do what you've, or find somebody who's done what you're already trying to do. Yeah, I think you will find a lot of people willing to help you and willing to support you, especially in the sustainability space where money sort of comes second to value and values. So if you can find somebody who already has a sustainable business, it's worth just going to them and picking their brain about it. You can find people in, networking groups, co-working spaces. LinkedIn is a great one. I think I get like 500 connections a day on there. So yeah, that would definitely be my advice to anybody who's looking for anything. And of course, drop me a DM on LinkedIn if you really need anything else. My DMs are always open. Well, it was a pleasure speaking to you all. I thank you so much for picking my little breakout room, and I hope to see some of you in the future. I think we'll wrap up. We've only got like 30 seconds left. So again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking to all of you, and I'll see you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for a great session. Bye, guys.
No problems.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Good to see you all.